The Panama Canal is the most impressive scar in global engineering. Yet few know that this 82-kilometer waterway was built upon the shifting foundation of a geopolitical lie. In 1903, Colombia lost vital strategic territory not to a popular army, but to a handful of mercenaries and a French engineer. The revolution that created Panama took less than 8 hours to complete and cost, at the time, only $100,000 in direct bribes. This was not a cry for freedom. It was a check. This blueprint was dictated by the cold geopolitics of Theodore Roosevelt, an American president who did not ask for permission, but instead created a new nation simply to gain control over the most crucial pathway for global trade. He viewed the world as a chessboard, and Colombia as merely a reluctant pawn. The spark ignited precisely on November 3, 1903, when the battleship USS Nashville anchored off the coast, militarily ensuring that the Colombian army could not even disembark and crush the sham. What is the true cost of liberty when it is sponsored by a superpower? How did a single man rewrite the world map with the tip of a cigar and a military telegram? And why, even today, does the shocking truth of how this country was built remain an uncomfortable secret? The discomfort lies in the fact that the foundation of an entire nation was decided not by its inhabitants, but by a handful of powerful men in Washington and New York, and a single French engineer. The flame of the Panamanian Revolution was not a spontaneous wildfire. It was a match struck by Theodore Roosevelt. Frustrated by Colombia's refusal to ratify the Hay-Haran Treaty, he triggered the contingency plan. On November 3, 1903, the uprising began, orchestrated by bankers and railroad magnates. Just 4 days later, the United States hastily recognized Panamanian sovereignty, disregarding decades of diplomatic ties with Bogota. The swiftness was the evidence of bad faith. 2 weeks after the revolution, the Bunau-Varilla Treaty was signed, guaranteeing the U.S. perpetual and sovereign control over the Canal Zone, a 10-mile-wide strip. This was not freedom. It was a military acquisition. The silent presence of the battleship USS Nashville in Colon Harbor ensured that Colombian troops were effectively blocked from landing to quell the disturbance. The lesson was clear. When global commerce demands it, sovereignty can be bought. This act of engineered independence secured a passage that would cut the sea voyage between the Atlantic and Pacific by nearly 8,000 nautical miles. But who truly paid the price for that strip of land? And how long can a nation thrive when its founding document is a corporate transaction masked as a glorious revolution? The answer to those questions lies buried beneath 50 miles of dense malarial jungle in the narrowest neck of land in the Americas. Before 1903, this volatile, tropical strip was merely the Department of Panama, a neglected, distant province of Greater Colombia. But geographically, it held the key to the future. For centuries, global trade was dictated by the agonizing 8,000-mile journey around Cape Horn, a perilous maritime gauntlet that cost countless ships and lives. The vision of cutting this journey, the dream of a liquid highway uniting the Atlantic and the Pacific, was so profound that it became an obsession for the world's rising powers. The French, under the leadership of Ferdinand de Lesseps, the architect of the Suez Canal, attempted it first. Between 1881 and 1889, they poured billions into the project. They failed catastrophically. The enemy was not the terrain, but the disease. Yellow fever and malaria decimated the workforce, killing over 20,000 men and bankrupting the company. The failure left a grim, tangible legacy: abandoned equipment rusting in the jungle and a desperate corporate shell holding a worthless, yet potentially revolutionary concession. Enter the two protagonists who would rewrite the map. First, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt viewed the world not through diplomacy, but through the barrel of a battleship. He believed the canal was a military and economic imperative for the United States to fulfill its destiny as the world's preeminent power. The Spanish-American War proved his point. Getting the USS Oregon from California to Cuba took 67 agonizing days, a delay that risked the entire campaign. Roosevelt needed that canal, and he needed it now. Time, for him, was a national security risk. The second protagonist was the true puppet master, Philippe Bunau-Varilla, a French engineer who had served under de Lesseps. Bunau-Varilla was a man driven by financial ruin and revenge. He was the chief shareholder and lobbyist for the failed French company, holding the rights to the path that cost thousands of lives. His motivation was simple: sell the defunct concession to the deepest pocket, the United States, before the rights expired. Colombia, sovereign owner of Panama, stood in the way. Bogotá was slow, meticulous, and deeply worried about ceding control to the rapidly expanding power of Washington. In 1903, Colombia rejected the Higueron Treaty, which would have granted the U.S. full control over the Canal Zone for 99 years. They asked for more money and greater recognition of their sovereignty. For Roosevelt, who was used to demanding, not negotiating, this was not a diplomatic negotiation, it was blackmail. It was at this precise moment, when legitimate diplomacy failed and the French concession clock was ticking toward zero, that Bunau-Varilla approached Roosevelt's inner circle. The engineer didn't propose further negotiation. He proposed regime change. He presented a meticulous plan, a blueprint for a revolution that would require precisely three things: a local Panamanian faction willing to wave the flag a briefcase full of money, and the timely arrival of the most powerful navy in the hemisphere. The entire operation was priced at $100,000, a pittance for the world-changing prize at stake. The Colombian officials in Panama, unaware they were being sold out by a French corporate lobbyist and the U.S. president, watched the horizon. But they weren't waiting for a diplomatic convoy. They were waiting for the arrival of the U.S. Navy cruiser Nashville. The final damning piece of the plot was already underway, heading straight for Colon. The Nashville's arrival, steaming directly into Colon, was the final condemning piece of the conspiracy. What followed was not a spontaneous revolution, but the cold, calculated execution of a geopolitical master plan. The date was November 3, 1903. In Panama City, the conspirators, led by Dr. Manuel Amador Guerrero, were ready. They held the allegiance of the local military commander, General Esteban Huertas, an alliance secured through massive bribes supplied by Bunau-Varilla. Meanwhile, 500 Colombian troops from the Barranquilla-based Tiradores battalion, commanded by Generals Juan B. Tovar and Ramon G. Amaya, disembarked in Colon, expecting to swiftly quell a minor revolt. They stepped off the boat and strayed into a carefully constructed trap. The conspirators' genius lay not in fighting, but in separating the head from the body. Panama City, where the Declaration of Independence was to take place, was separated from Colon, where the Colombian loyalists were waiting by a vital narrow stretch of land, the Panama Railroad. This railroad was key. It was owned entirely by the American-controlled Panama Railroad Company. When Generals Tovar and Amaya demanded transport for their 500 men across the isthmus to Panama City, they were met with a polite yet absolute refusal. The official excuse was that the railroad could only transport the generals themselves and their immediate staff, citing logistical complications and, more menacingly, the U.S.'s treaty-bound obligation to maintain neutrality on the line. Tovar and Amaya foolishly agreed, allowing themselves to be separated from their troops. This single decision, whether born of arrogance or naivete, sealed Colombia's fate. As the Colombian generals sped toward Panama City, where they were immediately arrested, their loyal troops were left stranded in Colon, facing the unwavering broadside of the USS Nashville. The reality hit the remaining Colombian command like a tropical storm. The U.S. Navy was not there to observe neutrality, it was there to enforce an outcome. Captain John Hubbard of the Nashville issued his warning. Any movement by Colombian troops to suppress the nascent rebellion would be considered an act of war against the United States. This was the moment the lie became codified force. By the morning of November 4th, the Republic of Panama was proclaimed in Panama City. Back in Colon, the Colombian troops, leaderless, demoralized, and realizing they were checkmated by a global superpower's naval might, were bought off. The price, $8,000 in gold for the officers and promise of passage home. The revolution cost the conspirators less than $100,000 total, but secured an empire for Roosevelt. The speed with which Washington acted confirmed the conspiracy. On November 6, 1903, just 3 days after the staged revolt, the United States formally recognized the Republic of Panama. This was a record in diplomatic history, slicing through decades of tradition. But the most humiliating twist was yet to come. The man who truly benefited, Philippe Bunau-Varilla, was not a Panamanian, but a French citizen and lobbyist. He immediately appointed himself the Panamanian minister to the United States. And before any true representative of the newly formed nation could arrive in Washington, Bunau-Varilla signed the Bunau-Varilla Treaty of 1903. This treaty gave the United States not just the right to build the canal, but control in perpetuity over a 10-mile-wide strip of sovereign Panamanian territory, effectively creating a state within a state. The shock was palpable even among the Panamanian conspirators. They had traded one distant ruler, Colombia, for an infinitely more powerful and immediate one, the United States. Panama was independent, yes, but its birth certificate was signed by a Frenchman, paid for by American capital, and enforced by American steel. This was Roosevelt's Big Stick doctrine laid bare, a display of unilateral power that mocked international law. The United States had not merely facilitated a revolution, it had manufactured a nation to steal its most valuable asset. The economic cost to Colombia was immediate and devastating, but the precedent set by Roosevelt would echo for decades, establishing a new, muscular American interventionism that defined the 20th century. The global stage was set, and the world had just watched a superpower literally redraw the map for profit. The canal was now a certainty. But what were the true long-term costs of this fabricated freedom? That fabricated freedom came at a massive cost, and not just for the new nation. Colombia was wounded to the core, its sovereignty shredded by a handful of Americans and Frenchmen meeting in a yacht. The humiliation lingered, setting a precedent for resentment. It took nearly 2 decades of frozen relations before the United States finally offered compensation. In 1921, they paid Colombia $25 million, a paltry sum compared to the lost economic potential. But notably, this payment never included a formal apology for the military intervention that violated international law. While diplomacy moved slowly, the brutal labor on the isthmus raged forward. The U.S. inherited the disastrous French failure, but transformed it into an engineering triumph at a terrifying human cost. Over 5,600 workers died during the American construction phase between 1904 and 1914, mostly from disease and accidents, adding to the estimated 22,000 who perished during the earlier French attempts. When the canal opened in 1914, it was an artery of global trade, but every nautical mile carried the weight of thousands of forgotten lives. The geopolitical cost was equally stark. The most damning evidence of the lie was the canal zone itself. A strip of land, 10 miles wide, slicing through the heart of Panama, governed entirely by Washington. Panama was an independent nation, yet on its most vital soil, Americans held the status of sovereign power. The U.S. flag flew, U.S. law prevailed, and Panamanians were treated as foreigners in their own backyard. Panama was the country, but the U.S. was the owner of its soul. Theodore Roosevelt's doctrine of speaking softly and carrying a big stick was no longer theory. It was the foundation of a new global trade route. The canal immediately cemented the U.S. as a two-ocean naval and commercial power, drastically reducing travel distances by an average of 8,000 nautical miles for ships sailing between New York and San Francisco. This single act established a blueprint for unilateral intervention that would be repeated across Latin America throughout the 20th century. The lie of 1903 persisted for nearly a century. It took decades of nationalist struggle and diplomatic pressure, culminating in the Torrijos-Carter treaties of 1977, for sovereignty to be gradually restored, achieving full transfer only on the final day of 1999. The story of Panama in 1903 is an unforgiving mirror. It forces us to ask, what does freedom truly mean when it is granted and protected by a superpower with a vital interest in control? The map was redrawn, world trade was transformed, but the lesson endures. Power, when unregulated, will always find a way to dress greed in the costume of liberation. Thus, the newly stitched Panamanian flag rose over the ruins of Colombian sovereignty, yet the cost of this freedom was too heavy to ignore. The truth, exposed by history, is that Panama did not liberate itself. It was purchased and constructed. The Bunau-Varilla Treaty granted the U.S. the Canal Zone as if they were sovereign, for $10,250,000 annually. It wasn't merely a canal, it was a corridor of American power, a permanent scar etched onto the geopolitical map of Latin America. This is the core of the shocking truth promised by our title. The foundation of a new country, Panama, was paved by a colossal strategic deception. It was the consolidation of the Roosevelt doctrine, the power of the big stick, not just spoken, but implemented through military and diplomatic engineering. The canal, operational by 1914, drastically shortened global trade routes, but it taught the world that, in the arena of great powers, liberty is often just a label assigned to economic convenience. Colombia lost its most strategic territory, and the world gained an enduring lesson that global progress sometimes requires the forced sacrifice of national sovereignty. This has been just one of the days that shaped our world. To not miss the next defining historical event we uncover here on the channel, subscribe now to The Day That Changed Everything and activate notifications. What other day would you like to see featured here? Comment below.